Ready to go live here.
I think I have a meeting in my phone. It's not like a joke, it's something else. Wait, I could be on a roof in sunshine, finally, or I could be in the east, and then the next day, it's obvious rain. Great.
2 days of rain, 1 day of good weather, right? 3 days of rain, 1 day of good weather.
I used to think of it as generally good weather, and then what's the exception? Now I think it's rain, good weather is the exception. You got any pay-ins?
I've got, not much. I'm doing first cut, second cut, and third cut all in the same bale. I've got hay all over the place on the ground, boys. You can now. Be baling some this afternoon and tomorrow.
Well, finally, a string of sunny days, low humidity, a little late.
I'll just have to sit down.
I know there's a lot of people jumping out to chop corn today.
All that stuff, tires coming up wet.
This is a logging job that was, I've never seen so much gravel.
Yeah.
Really? Well, they built it.
I want
Had to. Yeah. Big, well. Tough.
Right.
Well.
On vacation Saturday, I gotta get everything on the ground in the barn by tomorrow night.
Got any high school students around?
No, they're in school. I got a geriatric crew.
Is it far? So you could probably have a pass for those students, help them gain real world experience. What's that?
I was always the one that stacked them in the barn, stacked them on the wagon. Now I'm the one that puts it on the conveyor going up into the barn. Wondering if when they stack it, it's gonna blow out the walls of the barn. Of December.
I think we have. Yeah, it's
It's the last item. Apologize for the delay there. We had some procedural things that I needed to be clear on. And I knew there was going to be construction outside the building. I didn't know it was going to be outside our particular committee room. Right now, it's okay. It plays havoc with my hearing aids, that's for sure, when it's going on. We'll have to do what we can through this process. Welcome to the September 21 meeting of the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules. We have a very full agenda today, and we are getting a little bit of a late start, and we will finish at noon. If we're not, we'll have to make some adjustment to that. So I'd like to have everyone introduce themselves. I'll start with Legislative Counsel.
Anthea Dexter Cooper from the Office of Legislative Counsel.
And Representative Mark Higley for the Orleans Lamoille District.
Jenny Lyons representing Chittenden Southeast.
Chris Bray representing the Addison Senate District.
Representative Seth Bongartz representing Bennington Fort.
Mark McDonald representing Orange County Senate District. Representative Trevor Squirrel representing Underhill and Jericho. We have a member on Zoom.
Representative Carol Odie, representing the far north end of Burlington.
Charlene Dindo, Committee Assistant.
Lindsay Trier, Administrative Assistant.
Okay, welcome all. First order of business is to review and approve minutes. We have two sets of minutes, one from July 27, 2023, and one from August 10, 2023, which is just one particular item. Do I have a motion? So move, Mr. Chair. And we'll take them separately, if I may. So there's a motion to approve minutes of July 27, 2023. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And then the minutes from August 10, 2023. Senator Bray has moved. We approve the minutes of August 10, 2023. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you. We'll get the agenda, but before we get started, I had a request from one of the presenters. It's actually, I believe, doing 3 rules here, 2 of them permanent and 23 P03, 23 P14, then there's an emergency rule, which is 23 P07. There's a request to move up 23 P14 after 23 P03. So the 2 permanent rules they would do, and then take their emergency rule in process. A motion to do so? Senator Bray has. And any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. With that, why don't we get started? First up is 22-826, Office of Professional Regulation, Rule on Alternative Preparatory Paths for Funeral Directors and Embalmers. Lauren Lehman.
Good morning, Lauren Lehman for the record, General Counsel for the Office of Professional Regulation. I'm here today to present the rule on alternative preparatory paths for funeral directors and embalmers. This is the product of a legislative directive or authorization in the statutes authorizing the Office of Professional Regulation to develop alternative paths to licensure for both funeral directors and embalmers. We've already had a rule adopted for funeral directors. This rule before you today makes several minor modifications to that funeral director alternative path rule and adds an alternative pathway to licensure for embalmers. In summation, rather than requiring an out-of-state degree and only out of state because Vermont doesn't have embalmer schools, but a 3-year degree and a national examination. This provides a pathway to licensure with some coursework at community colleges or at other institutions, plus an apprenticeship that has been pre-approved by the Office of Professional Regulation, followed by an exam with certain content. We've already had a lot of uptake on the funeral director pathway, and we're hopeful that this will provide a similar pathway for embalmers and improve workforce access in the state in this industry.
All set?
Yes, from my perspective.
Any questions from the committee?
If there is no question, would you like a motion? I move that we approve 22P26 rule on alternative preparatory paths for funeral directors and embalmers with the proposed modification submitted by the Office of Professional Regulation, September 13th of 2020.
Okay, we have a motion from on the table from Representative Higley to approve Rule 23 as modified. Any questions, discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. And the next item on the agenda is also yours, Lauren, 22P27, Office of Professional Regulation, Administrative Rules for Notary Public Continuing Education.
Yes, thank you. So this is, again, the administrative rules for notary public continuing education. As this committee knows, we've had an ever-changing landscape in notary public regulation over the last couple of years since 2019. But one of the components when OPR assumed regulation of the Notary Public Commission in 2019 was to require continuing education for commission holders. because we weren't able to get a full rule done by the time this renewal of the first commissions came up this past January. We proposed this piecemeal rule that addresses just the continuing education required to renew a commission. OPR in the statutes is authorized to adopt up to 2 hours of continuing education, or to require up to 2 hours of continuing education for renewal of a commission. We decided 1 would be sufficient in terms of balancing costs and need. And it would have to be live, or it doesn't have to be live, it doesn't have to be interactive, but it does need to contain both audio and visual content. The rule provided a lot of guidance. We didn't enforce it, but this was the guidance we used in this last renewal. We're hoping to continue to require it going forward. Feedback we got was people did not want to pay the additional cost for a course, but of course, we do find in practice that there's a need for additional guidance for notaries public, just ensuring that they're able to fulfill all the regulatory requirements in terms of certificates. And as we enter the world of remote notarization, we feel that at least 1 hour of continuing education every 2 years is necessary to ensure that notaries public are fulfilling the requirements of the statutes and rules for those for document for performing notarial acts. So that's what this rule is: 1 hour every 2 years, minimal interactivity, but audio and visual content required.
Thank you. Any questions? I'm looking at notes from Legislative Council, and these are responses to questions that you had on 27, P27.
Yeah, we got the answers we wanted. One was just about a discrepancy for the money range. It's 0 to 40, not 0 to 35. And the other one was about under the statute 26 section 5343C, what was done in order to get the advice of the advisor appointees. And Lauren told us that in developing the rules, OPR convened a meeting of the advisors in October 2022 and shared the draft rule with them at that time. And we thought that was just information you might want to have.
It's explanatory.
Yeah. Okay. Nothing's changed, no proposed revisions.
Okay. Any other questions? Senator Bray?
We're looking for a motion yet. I would move approval of Rule 22P27, Office for Professional Regulation, Administrative Rules for Notary Public Continuing Education.
Ray has tabled a motion to approve Rule 22P27 with no modifications. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you all.
And next up, we have 23P16, Agency of Natural Resources, Wastewater System, Potable Water Supply Rules. We have Douglas Bruce.
Bruce Douglas.
Sorry?
Bruce Douglas. Bruce is my first name.
Oh, got the other way around. Okay. Got that. And Catherine? Was it?
Catalina.
Okay. You both want to join us? Are you both speaking?
Yeah.
Okay. I have to say, this is a very thick rule that you gave to us.
The explanation. Sure. For the record, I'm Katharina Narrigan. I'm an Associate General Counsel with the Department of Environmental Conservation. For you is the wastewater and potable water supply rule provisions. The main purpose of this provision is just to fix a typographical. It's The main purpose of this revision is to fix an error that was present in the last revision. It's a minor modification to ensure that Vermonters aren't bearing extra costs because of an administrative error that was present in the rule.
And then the Technical Advisory Committee, which is established by statute to support the program and review regulations, felt that this is an opportunity to fix a few things that they noticed once the 2019 rules were in place. So it's housekeeping, additional changes to the rule, minor changes, but at a number of subchapter points that there were improvements in the rule that were recognized once it essentially hit the streets in 2019. We held 2 public hearings and there was no public comment on the rule. And we have a representative of the Technical Advisory Committee, Gunnar McCain, here if there are any questions pertaining to their involvement, but they were deeply involved in developing this revision.
That's the extent of what we're looking at here. Big document. Okay, thank you. Any questions from the committee?
I guess just to make sure we understand this. So,
Representative Bombers.
as I understand it, the rule was passed in what, 17? So,
2019.
oh, okay. In sort of 24 inches rather than the 18 and everything. We don't think, how did that happen, or what is that? What was the?
I'll explain. Yes. So it was simply a typographical error. I mean, there's a lot of places in the rule with numbers requirements for depth. This is ground surface depth to bedrock, and the 24 inches to bedrock has been in place since 1982 at least as a requirement for a mound system, which is you're basically building your wastewater system above grade. And however, since 2007, it allowed 18 inches to bedrock when you do a hydrogeologic study to show you the soils have the capacity to move that wastewater away from the system and still maintain your separation distances. So inadvertently, the 18 and 24 were switched in this one place, and there were individuals who have the character, there's a handful of people in Chittenden County specifically, they're in that range, and they would have to do advanced treatment to overcome this, not just put in a mound. So that's the financial. It's a rare that you happen to be in that little range, but if you are, it's very costly, and that's why it needed to be fixed.
So when this went through Lcar, back then, everybody thought they were voting for.
No one saw that as a change. Well, the 2019 rule overall was a significant change to the previous rule, and that's why it was missed, because it's the 2019 amended the 2007 rule. So there was a lot of reorganization and the format that made it long. However, so in the transposition of the requirements to a new organizational layout, that was inadvertently listed as 24 inches to bedrock when it should have been 18.
Senator Bray.
Thanks for the explanation, and I guess I'm just looking for reassurance that one, you're sticking to a pre-existing practice, so that seems, that's easy to understand. I'm just also double checking that you're not saying, oh, well, we're returning to a less stringent standard or something, and that someone ever said, actually, what we would like to do is increase the distance by 6 inches. So this is an error, not like a judgment that it was more prudent or protective to go to a greater depth, soil depth required.
That's an excellent question, and you're correct. So it was a correction, not a judgment, and the rationale is when you have the 24 inches, assumption that maybe some water's going to flow along the bedrock. There's going to be a little bit of horizontal migration, so you may not get the whole 24 inches. And this is saying, if you show that that's less than 6 inches, you're okay. So it's basically very long-standing, a good practice. It's part of Vermont is a rule since 2007. We had universal jurisdiction. We want to have as many tools in the toolbox available to prove sites suitable for on-site systems. And this is just one that, again, it was an error. It was in 2007 that this was part of the previous major overhaul of the rules to accommodate universal jurisdiction by the department.
You all set?
Yes, thank you.
Senator, Senator.
I'm trying to understand the difference between how it used to be and how it will be. Under the proposed rules, if there is a certain amount of soil over the bedrock, it is assumed that it is safe and proper. Previously, you used to dig a hole and pour the water in and see what happened. And if it passed the test, it was safe. And if it didn't, the water stayed there and didn't dissipate naturally. Is that correct?
That is correct. And that test came from the 1920s. And we've learned a lot with how to characterize soils to get a better sizing of the dispersal system and suitability.
I have my beekeeper's hat today, just happened to be coincidence. I've kept bees, and I assumed that they would live in the wintertime, and they didn't. And I'm not a good beekeeper. My assumptions, having tried to follow the rules, have failed. It just strikes me as these new rules will provide certain challenges. Must the soil above the bedrock be soil that's accumulated there since the last glacier over thousands of years? Or can you take a truckload and cover the bedrock and come back a year or two later and say, wow, there's 2 feet over the bedrock?
This is a requirement for naturally occurring soil. So it's soil that exists on the site that's over the rock that this requirement pertains to. And basically the fill is what you're adding to that for the system to disperse, the wastewater through pipes and into the sand. And this is making sure it's going to stay subsurface, moving away from the underneath the system and moving away from the system. That's why you want to have naturally occurring soil, and it's the level of naturally occurring soil with certain hydraulic properties, as you pointed out before. Regarding the percolation test used to be that hole in the ground where you pour water, and now in practice since 2007. Licensed designers who do this work have been using soil morphology. Very few stragglers are still doing the percolation test. So that point of removing the percolation test from the requirement is to acknowledge practice and avoid the unnecessary costs. You have to describe the soils anyways in an evaluation of a site for a wastewater system. So you can collect all your information in a test bed that you look at the soil profile, and then the percolation test is not needed. But this is for naturally occurring soil.
So in your testimony, you just said that making sure the water moves away.
Yeah.
How do you make sure the water moves away if you don't pour water in it and see if it moves away?
by looking at what's called the physical characteristics of the soil. And that's the texture, the density of that soil, and how tightly, how it's structured, how it's arranged in the subsurface. And you can characterize the ability to receive water and the ability to transmit water by looking at the soil, the physical characteristics of the soil in the field. And that's been well proven. For example, the state of Maine has been using soil physical characteristics since the 70s of sizing systems. I mean, it's where we've had them in rules for larger systems since 1991 for the indirect. Larger leach fields can use this. It just made sense to get. So we left this as an option. 2007, we said you can still do a percolation test if you like, or you can do soil physical characteristics. And the recognition is that everyone's recognizing the benefit of, you're more accurate. The difficulty with pouring water into a hole is it really depends on what's the layers underneath that hole and whether it's a stratified system, and maybe one little thin layer can take a lot of water and all the rest are dense. Whereas if you're looking at the soil, you may say it's all dense and look, but even though there's one coarser textured layer, it doesn't override everything else that's going to be limiting for the capacity. So you need to design the system based on the whole soil profile, not just the ability of a water to seep out of a hole. Does that help?
One's a test and the other's a prediction.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Senator Bray.
If there are not more questions, I would move approval of Rule 23, P16, Agency of Natural Resources, Wastewater and Potable Water Supply Rules.
We have a motion on the table, Senator Bray, to approve 23P16. Any additional discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The rules approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
What's that?
Probably can get that on.
Okay, next up, we have 23P03, Department of Health Home Visiting Rule. And I believe Natalie, is it Wheel?
It's a while, thank you.
Wheel. I knew it's one of the others. Okay.
Chair Squirrel and committee members, thank you for inviting me here today. My name is Natalie Weil, and I'm a policy advisor for the Department of Health. With this filing, the department is proposing to amend the home visiting rule. The purpose of the rule is to establish the standards that apply to home visiting service providers in Vermont. This rulemaking updates the rule to reflect current practices and program management, clarifies the services regulated under this rule, removes the requirement that home visiting service providers be at no cost to families to align current provider practices, consolidates and moves recommendations from the existing rule into the manual, which is a supplemental resource for home visiting service providers. The rulemaking simplifies the required documentation and program plan process for home visiting service providers, updates the employee and volunteer hiring standards by removing the comprehensive orientation by requiring comprehensive orientation to new home visiting service providers within the first 6 months of date of hire. The rulemaking ensures that all screening tools be used by home visiting providers are evidence-based and reorganizes the requirements of the home visiting service providers for clarity. In drafting the rule, the department had extensive stakeholder outreach with many stakeholders. To name a few, the Home Visiting Alliance and the Department for Children and Families, who have reviewed and support the proposed changes. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Committee members, any questions, comments? Senator Lyons?
I'm not sure whether Charlene forwarded my approval. Did you? Oh, yeah. With the September 5th.
Thank you.
Senator Bray?
Good morning. So in your economic impact analysis, you talked just briefly about sort of unintended consequences related to doulas and lactation consultants. Can you just explain sort of what the unintended consequence was and how this undoes or addresses that issue?
Yes, thank you for your question. This rulemaking clarifies the scope of home visiting service providers that are regulated under this rule. There was some misunderstanding between the home visiting service provider community who was regulated under this rule. So as you see in the rule, we added a scope section that clearly defines that if you're providing any services related to home visiting services, you are considered a home visiting service provider and therefore regulated under this rule. Now, that clarifies that doulas and lactation consultants are now considered to be home visiting service providers, thereby regulated under this rule. The structure for these independent home visiting service providers, some operated off of a fee for service business structure. And in promulgating this rule, we didn't want to ruin their existing business structure. So we removed the requirement in the rule that home visiting services must be at no cost to families, and to allow for doulas and lactation consultants who have a business in Vermont to continue to provide their services. And what we did instead is remove that requirement that there be no cost, and instead insert protections for families so that any costs that they may see, those fees shall be provided before services are rendered, thereby allowing there to be a cost, a fee for providing these services. So these businesses can continue to function.
Thank you.
Questions?
So there's no request for an extension to November 14th? Is there a request for an extension? That's a separate, okay. So for the rule, I'd like to make a motion.
Sure.
That we approve the 23P03 home visiting rule with proposed modifications submitted by the Department of Health and correspondence dated September 5th, 2023.
Senator Lyons, table a motion to approve Rule 23P03. Any additional discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. And to Senator Lyons' point, there was a request, or is a request, for a 45-day extension of this 8-month adoption deadline, which is currently set to expire on September 30, 2023. So we're just, is there a date on that?
November 14th.
Okay. So that's the request. Any discussion around that request? In a motion? Senator Bray?
Move that we grant the Department of Health's request for an extension of its 8-month adoption deadline for 22P03 home visiting rule until November 14, 2023.
You heard Senator Bray's motion. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Those opposed? Okay. Thank you. Next up is, let's see, we're pulling up 23P14. Department of Health Vermont Medication Assistance Program rule. Natalie, you're up again.
Thank you. My name is still Natalie Weil, and I'm a policy advisor at the Department of Health, for the record. And with this filing, the department is proposing to amend the Vermont Medication Assistance Program rule. This rule establishes the eligibility requirements for assistance under the Vermont Medication Assistance Program, also known as VMAP. The purpose of VMAP is to provide financial assistance to low-income individuals living with HIV for the purchase of prescription medications that have been determined to prolong life and prevent the deterioration of health. This rulemaking proposes the following changes. Updates the recertification of eligibility application process to conform with the Policy Clarification Notice 2102 issued on October 2021 by the Federal Health Resources and Services Administration, also known as HRSA. Specifically, the rulemaking removes an extra certification step for beneficiaries at the 6-month mark and proposes a yearly recertification requirement instead of a every 6-month requirement. The rulemaking simplifies and updates the rule for consistency with the program's management and reorganizes the rule for clarity. In drafting the rule, the department worked with the Community Advisory Group, a statewide group of stakeholders that work with the Department of Health to promote effective HIV care and prevention. They have reviewed and support this rule, the proposed changes, my apologies. So with that, I am happy to answer any questions you may have.
So this is an emergency rule. This is not an emergency.
We moved
other.
up the permanent rule. So, committee members, any questions? Right, hearing none.
I'd like a motion, I move that we approve 23P14 of the Vermont Medication Assistance Program rule with proposed modifications submitted by the Department of Health on September 5th, 2023.
Okay, so we have a motion from tabled by Representative Higley, 23P14 with modifications. Any additional discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay. Thank you very much, Heidi. I mean, Natalie. I don't know where I got Heidi from. Okay.
Is that there too?
Thank you very much.
Okay. Next up, we have 22 E06, which is an emergency rule, Department of Health. Medication assisted treatment for opioid use disorder. Brendan Atwood. There he is.
Good morning.
Good morning, Brendan.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members. For the record, my name is Brendan Atwood. I am a policy advisor with the Health Department. With this filing, we are proposing to amend and in fact actually renew the emergency rules governing medication assisted treatment for opioid use disorder. By way of background, the purpose of this rule is to establish the requirements for office-based opioid treatment providers to prescribe buprenorphine to patients seeking treatment for OUD. And it also establishes the Vermont-specific requirements for opioid treatment programs. So this rulemaking follows a change from December of 2022, whereby Congress removed the federal requirement that medical providers first obtain a waiver from the federal government in order to prescribe buprenorphine to patients seeking treatment for OUD. And so this rulemaking similarly removes that provision from state law, allowing providers with a valid DEA registration number with the appropriate Schedule III authority to continue to prescribe buprenorphine to patients seeking treatment for OUD. Simply put, without this rulemaking, providers would be required to obtain a waiver that is no longer obtainable, which could, of course, hinder access to treatment for OUD. We worked with the Vermont Medical Society in drafting this rule, and they are supportive of this. And I will note further that we intend to file the permanent rule with Lcar in the next week or two. So happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Any members?
So I'll move approval of 23E06, Department of Health rules governing medication-assisted treatment for opioid use disorder, emergency rule.
Okay, we have a motion tabled by Senator Lyons to approve 22E06. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay. Thank you, Brendan.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, we have 23E07, Department of Health, reportable and communicable diseases rule, and Natalie Fagon.
Thank you very much. For the record, Natalie Weil, Policy Advisor with the Department of Health. With this emergency filing, the department is proposing to amend the reportable and communicable diseases rule. The purpose of the rule is to protect public health through the control of communicable and dangerous diseases. These regulations require the early and prompt reporting of listed diseases so that the Department of Health may take any necessary protective action. Specifically, this rulemaking removes the requirement to report negative and indeterminate SARS-CoV-2 results to the Department of Health, the lab test to determine if someone has COVID-19. The rulemaking changes the required reporting period for positive SARS-CoV-2 result from immediately to within 24 hours, adds the virus Mpox to the list of reportable diseases and the associated laboratory finding, non-variola orthopox, to the list of reportable laboratory findings. The rulemaking clarifies that immediate reporting for identified diseases and laboratory findings means they must report to the department by telephone. And finally, clarifies the difference between the laboratory finding that causes the virus SARS and the laboratory finding that causes the virus COVID-19. I'll note that regular rulemaking will commence shortly to make these amendments permanent and will include extensive stakeholder outreach. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Senator Bray.
Good morning again, and a quick question. So if someone after this meeting were to ask me why the sort of reporting requirements were changed to provide more time, some people might worry that communicable disease, you'd want to hear about it ASAP. So can you just explain how you set that timing and what you think about when you think about immediately versus within 24 hours?
Thank you for your question. It's a great one. Immediate reporting is reserved for things like public health emergency. And as the public health emergency for COVID-19 is stated at coming to an end, we can now move the SARS-CoV-2, the laboratory test, and COVID-19 to a reporting standard of within 24 hours so that, for example, you present at your doctor's office, you are showing signs of COVID-19, it's expected and required within the rule currently that the doctor immediately pick up the phone and make that report to the department. And based on resources and the end of the public health emergency caused by COVID-19, the department has determined that it's appropriate to move this reporting requirement to within 24 hours instead of immediately as you present to your doctor's office or to your lab.
Other questions or comments? Senator Bray.
If there's no further discussion for it, even if there is, I'll move the approval of Rule 23E07, Department of Health reportable and communicable diseases rule.
Senator Bray has put a motion on the table to approve 23E07. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Thank you very much, Natalie.
Thank you very much.
Okay. 23, EOA, Emergency Rule, Department of Health, ALS Registry Rule, and Brendan Atwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hopefully the committee is not getting tired of hearing from the department this morning. So with this filing, the department is proposing to adopt the amyotrophic lateral sclerosis emergency, ALS registry emergency rule. The ALS registry rule implements the Vermont ALS registry database for the collection of information determining the incidence of ALS in Vermont. Essentially, the rule establishes the data fields that are required to be reported by healthcare providers who are treating patients with ALS. So Act 149 of 2022 directed healthcare providers to submit reports to the department with regards to patients with ALS, and for the department to establish the ALS registry by July 1 of 2023. Prior to this filing, the department had already started to receive data submissions from providers. And working with stakeholders, we thought that it was important to adopt this rule as soon as possible to provide clarity to providers about what information needs to be reported, and also to ensure the optimization of the collection of this data in these early months. We did work with the Vermont Medical Society and the Board of Medical Practice on this rule. Both groups are supportive of this rulemaking. And we actually filed the permanent rule at the same time as we filed this emergency rule. So the department's intentions in terms of timing and scope are clear. So happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Ready?
There is a memo. Are you going?
Would you like to speak to it since you're one of the signatories?
Right. It was, I think, more of a technical correction. And perhaps, Brendan, you could speak to your response to the memo based on could be different providers involved.
Yes, thank you, Senator. So the issue essentially came up with how the statute was written, which requires any provider who's treating a patient with ALS to report to the department. It did not specify that provider needs to be treating that patient for ALS. And so there were some concerns that providers may be submitting duplicative reports for the same patient. And so we had to work with our legal folks to understand if we were able to kind of provide some clarity that would reduce the potential for that duplicative case reporting through the rules. So while we did not do so in this emergency rule, we will be offering a change through the permanent rule that allows a provider to not have to report if they're aware that a report for that patient has already been provided.
Yeah, I just want to raise an issue, and that is the use of an emergency rule in this situation. And my understanding, and I could turn to Ledge Counsel and she could maybe give a little bit of an explanation what qualifies as an emergency rule. I don't believe this qualifies as an emergency rule. I think we're likely going ahead and approve this. But I want to make the point that there's a special reason for using emergency rules. You knew that this would need to be in place, and it wasn't put in place. Understand, Brendan, that it was the responsibility of someone other than you to make that decision. Maybe you can speak a little bit to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I certainly appreciate that feedback. I'm reluctant to speak to kind of the basis for the emergency rule, which is a determination made by the appointing authority. However, I will say that there was a clear consensus from the department's perspective, as well as the stakeholders that we worked with, that given that these reporting requirements existed in statute and were essentially being effectuated already with reports coming to the department, that it was really in the best interest of providers and public health ultimately to be clear about what data was required to be reported to the department. So I can appreciate your concern, and I think give you my assurance as best we can that we will adopt these rules more timely and not seek to use the emergency rulemaking process outside of its intended purpose.
Yeah, I'm concerned that we use emergency rulemaking as a way to let things slide. So not about you, just want to make that statement.
Understood. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? On a break.
Senator Lyons has already made the motion.
Oh, go ahead.
I would move approval of Rule 23, E08, Department of Health, Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, registry rule.
I just wanted to hear you say it.
No modification.
I just wanted to hear you say it.
Thank you. I should have looked first.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table from Senator Bray to approve 2308 with no apparent modification. So any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Those opposed? Opposed? Okay. Thank you, Brendan. Appreciate it.
Thank you, committee. Have a great day.
Okay, next up on our agenda is DCF and AHS's response to memo regarding Rule 23E05, which was the Department for Children and Families Pandemic Era General Assistance Emergency Housing Transition. Remember, we've had this conversation in this committee. This committee chose either to approve or object to the rule. That we had a number of concerns about process and defining particular terms of process, and asked, and the memo was drafted by Legislative Council, which we signed off in August and sent to them, and they've given a timely response to that. And Senator Lyons and myself met with Ledge Council and also members of DCF and the agency to go over this on Monday. I think I might turn to Senator Lyons, if that's okay, to speak to this. Before she does, I think they've done, in my estimation, a good job responding to our concerns and addressing some of our issues with that.
Yes, thank you. And it does improve what we had looked at last time. And I understand that the House Human Services Committee, under the leadership of Representative Wood, has also looked at this and is comfortable with what we've received. The interesting part of it is, as you go through this and you look at the benefits procedures, and to be very clear, that Act 81 is a benefits process. So folks receive the benefit of temporary housing until April 1st. The confusion that arose was when we had the benefits integrated in with the GA program. And the program is slightly different, it has different requirements at federal and state level. So if you look at what has come to us from the agency, it's clear that it's being treated as a benefit, and that the hotel and motel owners are left in charge of looking at some of the behavioral or other conditions that would cause for eviction, but it also provides for an appeals process to the Human Services Board. So overall, it corrects some of the problems that we were looking at within the rule generally. And I'll let Katie McClin or Anthea speak further to any legal issues.
Katie McClin, Office of Legislative Counsel. I don't have much to add. The memo hits or addresses the points that were raised in the memo that you sent out to them. So they address the combination of the program benefit and the misconduct issue, and then the alternative housing placement issue. So we've received a response on all 3 points now.
Yeah, I also want to acknowledge that Nicole and Heidi from the department, DCF, are also here to answer any questions you might have. Before I go to your representative, did you want to add anything?
Oh, the only thing I would add is you'll see in the memo that they will be filing one or multiple emergency rules. Those will obviously come to this committee. And if you think about the timing with an emergency rule lasting 180 days, you're going to do that in October, according to the memo. That's going to get them to April. So you will see this again. You will not see this 2 more times. And then that will be the iteration that takes it to the conclusion of the benefit, unless, of course, something happens during the upcoming session that changes that.
Representative Higley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In looking over what was presented to us, I do have a couple of questions. And one of them is in regards to a motel owner that is asking a guest to leave for one of the issues, whether it's violent crime behavior or the other 3 issues addressed here. I noticed that there's no time frame for a response from the department in regards to when that could actually be enacted. So I guess that's my first question is, shouldn't there be a time frame to give these motel owners the ability to actually have these folks removed?
Thank you for the question, Representative Higley. I'm Heidi Moreau, Policy Advisor for the Department for Children and Families. The motel owners, they can evict a guest as soon as they want on their own time frame. The procedures address how the department will handle that eviction, whether it will be considered, whether they will be considered removed from the June 30th cohort or whether the department will rehouse them again. But the motel can still exit guests for whatever reason they want to.
And I guess the only other thing too, we had talked initially about, or I think it was mentioned anyway, about an appeal process. And again, is that addressed in this as well?
In the new version of the emergency rule that will be filed, we will insert notice and appeal language, but that still applies. It's in statute. It's in the Human Services Board statute. So clients can avail themselves of that fair hearing process.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, committee members? I don't believe any action is required by us. Yeah, we don't, as a committee, have to take any action. I again want to acknowledge the work that DCF and the agency did to respond to our concerns, and I appreciate that. I also said this Monday, but I'm saying it again today, and thank you very much. And let Shayla know that too. Oh, she's there. I didn't see you there. You popped on. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good job.
Okay. I don't believe we have any other items on the agenda. Okay. October 5 is our next meeting. And there's 5 rules, 6 rules. Let's,
And you've got 3 cannabis control board rules, the urban species rule, and the multiple, hopefully the last emergency administrative rules for notaries. For
okay.
the remote notarize.
When's the closing date for that meeting for me?
Already passed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll not be adding to this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which one's already passed?
The filing deadline for your October 5th meeting. So what you have is
Won't be adding it.
What we have is what.
Okay.
October 5th, there's a huge conflict. The House Human Services and Senate Health and Welfare have a joint meeting, one of the large ones on housing. So I'm going to be going back and forth, maybe or maybe.
I also have a conflict. I just wonder, can we move that, what's on the agenda for that meeting to the next meeting?
You can if you choose, but you will need to get extensions for at least the fur-bearing species rule as well as the 3 cannabis control board rules. And I believe there's one other rule that didn't make it onto this because there's also the plumbing rule. Nope, that one. 23 P09.
Yeah, I guess, my opinion, I'm not inclined to move the meeting or the agenda. I appreciate Senator Lyons and we can involve Senator Lyons as we need to in those conversations. And as I look at that list of rules, certainly one of them is quite controversial and not really under the jurisdiction of Senator Lyons' committee. So, and Representative Odie, I'm not understanding, are you part of one of those 2 committees that's in that meeting?
No, I have another. I
Oh,
have
yes.
another issue, but it's a legislative thing. But I just wonder if like with this meeting, we put 2 meetings worth of agenda items into this meeting. And I just wonder if we could do that and push it forward to the next one.
One of those rules might take 2 meetings.
Yeah.
All right.
As I said, Representative Odie, I guess I'm not inclined to do
Yeah,
that.
okay. I just wondered.
Okay, appreciate that. All right, any other business? Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.